Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, let's just dive right into this. If you've ever stood in front of a room, whether we're talking about a classroom full of students or a boardroom packed with colleagues, you know firsthand that there is a massive difference between simply talking at people and actually teaching them. Today, we're going to look at how we genuinely engage a room and build a master teacher's toolkit based on proven active learning frameworks.
But before we get into the nuts and bolts of those specific solutions, let's just acknowledge the universal challenge of leading any group. We have all sat through those agonizing sessions that rely entirely on passive, rote memorization, right? And we all know it completely fails to capture our attention or help us retain anything. Active learning is the ultimate antidote to that boredom. It literally forces the audience to participate, to think critically, and to build something real. So to fix this engagement problem, we are going to cover 4 key areas today. First up, the project method. Second, the discussion method. Third, problem-solving approaches. And finally, how to actually choose the right approach for your room.
All right, let's get into it. Section 1, the project method.
So this method actually follows a really specific 6-step life cycle. It kicks off with you, the teacher, providing a real, worthwhile situation. But here's where it gets interesting, where the power shifts. The students democratically choose and purpose the project entirely themselves. After planning it out, they hit the absolute longest phase, execution, where tasks are divided up based on individual skills, which obviously requires immense cooperation. Finally, the group judges their outcomes so they can learn from any mistakes, and then they record everything. Now, that final recording step, it is definitely not just some casual wrap-up. It results in a highly organized project book containing exactly 9 core elements. From stating their hypotheses all the way to outlining the methodology and sources, this structure formally documents their massive cooperative effort and really solidifies the whole learning experience.
Okay, so that's how you guide a group through actual hands-on execution. But a huge question pops up. How do you pivot from physically building things to the dynamic exchange of ideas?
Which brings us to section 2, the discussion method.
You know, we've all heard the old proverb, right? 2 heads are better than 1. And it's absolutely true. When a number of heads combine to solve a problem together, truly wonderful results can happen. But as a leader, you can't just throw people into a room and tell them to talk. You need a specific format. And you actually have 4 totally different formats to play with here. A symposium, that gives you formal, prepared speeches, whereas a panel is a much more casual, free-flowing chat among experts. Now, if you want direct conflict and rebuttals, well, you host a debate. And if you just want raw, unfiltered creativity, you use brainstorming, literally a storm of ideas with absolutely zero judgment on whether those ideas are actually good yet. But here's the catch. Regardless of whether you choose a super formal symposium or a totally chaotic brainstorm, executing it effectively requires a very straightforward 4-step procedure. You have to plan, prepare, conduct the session with clear rules, and evaluate. Without this underlying structure, your purposeful conversation is going to quickly devolve into pointless noise. What happens when open conversation has kind of run its course and you really need to pivot into a concrete resolution? That is exactly when we reach for the final and, honestly, the most analytical tool in our toolkit. Section 3, problem-solving approaches. To execute this kind of planned attack, you've got to guide your group through 5 very logical steps. You can't just guess at an answer here. You move sequentially. First, you define the exact perplexity. Then you formulate hypotheses, collect real data, rigorously test and judge those hypotheses against that data, and only then do you arrive at a final conclusion. So, the absolutely crucial point here is understanding the 2 distinct ways you can facilitate this. In the child-centered inductive method, you give learners specific examples, like, say, observing different types of birds, and they logically discover the general rule on their own, that all birds have feathers. It's example to rule. The deductive method, on the flip side, is heavily teacher-centered. You give them the rule first and then ask them to verify it using specific examples. One is about pure discovery, the other is all about verification. All right, let's wrap this all together. Section 4, choosing your approach. So you now have 3 really distinct, powerful frameworks in your back pocket. If you need cooperative execution and you want your group to build something tangible, you use the project method. If you're dealing with an issue where there are differing opinions, you deploy the discussion method and just pick the right format, like a panel or a debate. If you're facing a significant difficulty that requires a real analytical attack, you bring out the problem-solving method.
And throughout all of this, you now fully understand the dynamic friction between child-centered discovery, like inductive reasoning, and teacher-centered direction, like deductive reasoning.
As we conclude this explainer, I want you to think about the very next group you are going to be leading. Look at the people in that room. Look at the objective you need to achieve, and ask yourself, which of these 3 tools will you pull out to completely transform their learning experience? The toolkit is yours. Now, it's time to build.